Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Racing Mentor Sponsorship Podcast. You're here with me, Jess Shanahan, and Toby Trice. Hey, Toby, how are you doing today?
I'm really, really good, Jess. How's everything your way?
Yeah, really good. I've had just a really amazing week last week with doing the webinar, and then I actually did an additional webinar all about freelancing as well, which was really nice. So I feel like I've been really busy, like maybe all this lockdown stuff is starting to ease and everyone's kind of waking up and realizing that they need to do this sponsorship stuff, which is cool.
Yeah, it's definitely I've noticed that things are definitely starting to relax and people are starting now to talk more business. I too have had a pretty mad couple of weeks, to be fair, Jess. I've got obviously we've officially cancelled our plans to race this season, which was a bit of a hard moment, but it's absolutely right for my partners because we can't complete all the activity of sponsorship this season with kind of restrictions still in place. But I'm chatting to some really cool new potential sponsors, one of which is across the pond for a big championship next year. And let's hope that all comes off. So plenty of exciting times ahead, right, Jess?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the right decision not to do this year just because, and I think a lot of drivers are doing this. When you can't host people or do events or, have that one-on-one time with people, it's actually really difficult to fulfill some of the really valuable sponsorship stuff. So I think as much as we'd all love to be in a race car this year, sometimes you do have to go, actually, I'm doing this for the sponsors and kind of think, well, right, next year, focus. It sounds like you've got a lot of exciting stuff come up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, it's right. The heart and head situation. Your head's got to take over and do the right thing for your partners. But yeah, it's super exciting. So guys, today's podcast is all about PR. So I think there's going to be plenty to talk about, Jess, today because PR is such a huge and important thing for drivers to get right in order to kind of help activate sponsorship and make kind of more brand awareness for their partners in the media. But we're not going to be talking just motorsport PR today. We're going to be talking about how to get coverage across kind of all platforms that are relevant to your sponsors.
Yeah, and I think PR is really important, not just for your sponsors, but also for getting your name out there to attract sponsors as well. Because I think, there's a lot drivers can do to get themselves in front of, big audiences through, even if it's just through local radio. That can make a business go, oh, a young athlete who's doing a cool thing. And it can kind of help you open up those conversations because, you can even use your PR coverage as follow-ups or as your hook saying, oh, hey, did you hear me on local radio or see me on the TV or, read this in a magazine? It tells my story. Here's a link. Something like that it's a really good way to kind of open up those conversations as well.
Yeah, and I've got a prime example for that later on as we talk through the sort of more interesting parts of actual PR, because some of the press releases I've done last year has really elevated me this year. And two of the sponsors I'm currently talking to for 2021 has come in and interested on the back of that press release. So we'll get to that shortly later on. So Jess, just to start off with then, what does PR look like for drivers?
So I think most drivers think of PR and press coverage as just getting, a little mention in Autosport or having a feature done on the checkered flag or something like that, which is great. And we love motorsport coverage because it shows what you're doing well. Typically, if you get featured in a motorsport publication, you've probably won something or had some other kind of success within the actual racing part. But I actually think people need to think a bit wider when it comes to their own PR. Like, there's no reason that racing drivers shouldn't be featured in local press, which is another one that a lot of people manage to do, but also national press. Like, I've had racing drivers featured in Glamour, in the Telegraph, the Guardian, all sorts. So you can think really, really big with this stuff. So the fitness press is also a really good one because often it's a new story on, well, how does a racing driver get fit for driving a car? Is that different to, how a footballer might do something or another athlete? But then there's also, fashion, lifestyle, wider sport, men's health, men's general interest, women's general interest. There's so many opportunities. You just need to have the right story.
Completely agree, because as a racing driver, You're skilled in so many different areas, and there's so much to talk about with that. But something that of my experiences, and just off the back of kind of reading Jess's book and looking at how I can create kind of stories when really at the time I wasn't really anyone in the racing world because I was so new to it. It was my first year in. Is also look at your niche, and why you're different to the rest of the grid or other drivers, because your niche can really help establish you in the media because you've got a unique story, and you're giving the journalist kind of like an easy article to write because it's something really interesting. Combine that with some racing, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it goes back to why niche is important, because if you're only doing motorsport, you're competing against every other driver that's only doing motorsport. Whereas if you do have a niche, whatever it is, even if it's, a little bit more generic or really, really specific, you can then go to publications that cover that niche. And it just suddenly makes your story a whole lot more exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Because, as much as it'll be awesome, one of my goals is to get a big article in Autosport. That's kind of like one of my dreams. But like, say you're competing against, how many thousands or tens of thousands of drivers out there also trying to do the same thing. But kind of concentrating on your niche and looking at articles, perhaps in magazines or news articles that are relevant to that niche, you're actually creating something really interesting for that particular sort of newspaper or magazine, because rather than they're just normal posts that they're doing, you're kind of bringing motorsport into their business, which actually could help them get more readers. So it's kind of like a hook for the journalist to actually be interested in your story. And believe me, it's far easier actually to get quite a big article in even something like the Times. I've managed to get a story in the Times, and that was a single page spread in the Times, and that's massive in terms of reach and and an achievement. So yeah, it's amazing what you can bring with the kind of interest in motorsport and your niche. So definitely, if you haven't done so already, head back to the previous podcast talking about your niche and how to build that.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that you just said that I want to pick up on is, creating these relationships with journalists, because journalists are always looking for the next big story. And if you can give it to them, then they are going to look after you. So if you can, start building relationships with journalists on Twitter, on LinkedIn, wherever you like to hang out, let them kind of know what you're doing and maybe get into a conversation about whether there's, a story in that. Obviously, it's down to you to make it as easy as possible for them to write that story and kind of get it out there. So you need to really know a few really key elements that we'll go into. But before I do that, Toby, I kind of want to hear about your experiences with PR, because you've had some great coverage and loads more to come, I'm sure. So kind of what is your approach to PR, and kind of what does that look like?
Wow, it's been amazing. I've had some insane press coverage. It blew my mind what I achieved in my first year of motorsport last year. Just kind of focusing on that very goal of trying to get good press coverage. Just to give some examples for you guys that haven't seen what press coverage I have got. With my niche last year as a training driver as my kind of main occupation, and the angle of fertility, which is obviously why I'm racing. I'm raising awareness for fertility and couples that are dealing with infertility itself, has led me to get some low-level coverage. So I've had regular news posts in my local newspaper, which is fantastic because it builds this small community locally to me, and it's this really nice support group of people that are kind of behind my story, which is great. But then as I elevated that, I then started getting interest to have a really cool press release with the combination of me being a high-speed train driver and a high-speed racing driver, where we actually photographed a train, a car, and me all together, and made this amazing PR press release that we were celebrating a huge thing with my sponsor because it was a 10-year anniversary. So again, a goal of the sponsor we managed to achieve by putting this huge story together. And this article went far and wide, across the country. It went in rail magazines, which led me then to have radio interviews. More and more people got in touch with my story, and it was just insane. So much so that kind of early press coverage that I got led me to then go on to BBC Radio twice, both live and recorded show. I then got coverage in the Times through my story of the fertility. So during a kind of key week in the year, there's a fertility awareness week, and someone from the Times got in touch with me through the previous stories I had. And then finally, the biggest one that I got last year, Jess, and I know you was a big part of this, was that we ended up on BBC News, and we had about, I think it was a 6 or 7 minute story as the main piece story on BBC News. Like, it blew my mind. How that came about was some networking with some of the guys in the BBC team. They then knew other journalists that I'd spoke to that had articles in the Times and other newspapers. And then they were like, this story's insane. Again, it led back to my niche of the fertility angle. And yeah, we had this news piece. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, what a return for my sponsors to get kind of national coverage on TV as the main news piece. I was just like, yeah, I'm smiling now. Anyone that's listening and know me, I'm you know, it gives me goosebumps to think that actually happened last year.
And the amazing thing about BBC coverage is you can't buy it.
No.
So it literally is, you know, it's invaluable to potential sponsors. And if that's something that you can offer and you can say that is a potential, well, they're going to jump all over it.
Yeah, 100%. Well, one thing that I tried to get kind of a little bit more with the BBC, because obviously they can't advertise brands, because obviously they're the BBC. And I really wanted to keep trying to sneak the words of like Southeastern and my sponsors and other people that are involved, and trying to get the camera on, you know, the logos of the car, just to kind of just, you know, put subtle things in there. And they were really like, not against it, but they just weren't allowed. There's just obviously strict rules that they have to adhere to. And at the time I was a bit like, oh no, that's a bit annoying, because I'd like to get kind of a bit more visuals in there of the brands that help me out. But actually that didn't matter, because again, going back to what we spoke about in previous weeks, the fact that all these people were then engaging with my story, I had my social media increased, had emails sent to me from, you know, high net worth people, and all those people then became interested in the brands that got me there. So it went full circle, and it just really embraced kind of what I learned as part of your course, Jess, and how important it was.
Yeah, oh, that's so awesome. Like, I found that BBC TV is really, really strict about not showing too many logos or not being too close in on logos and having mentions. But I found that local BBC radio, they don't mind. Like, I've been on a couple of times where I've had to talk, I've just been talking about cars, or I think I talked about Grid Girls or something like that. And then the presenter asked me, oh, you know, what is it you do, Jess? You know, what's your work? And I was able to plug Racing Mentor just on live BBC radio, which was so cool. So I think they're maybe a little bit more lenient there. But yeah, my experience with BBC TV is that they're quite careful, which makes sense. Like, that's the whole thing of the BBC, isn't it?
Of course.
But I think it just goes to show like how powerful press coverage can be, even without logos. So just like literally your face and your story being out there is good news for your sponsors anyway.
Yeah, 100%. And just to kind of follow on from kind of just the BBC note and any big coverage you get, like, try not to make that just a one-time thing. So just as a quick tip today, the journalist that I've worked with last year, the BBC correspondent with, you know, they're on my kind of like weekly or monthly catch-ups, where I contact these people now and just, you know, hey, how's things? And just to keep, you know, in their minds, me fresh in their minds, essentially, so that if they need some extra coverage on a fertility story, I'm the first person that they're going to then get in touch with. And one of the journalists that wrote the article for the Times for me with, I had a chat with her the other day, and it looks like there could be some press coverage coming up in the early part of next year, which will tie really nicely in with potentially this new sponsor. So already I'm kind of like pre-planning with them what coverage I might be getting in the future. So it's, yeah, just a quick tip, guys. That's kind of what you need to be focusing on as well, is keeping those contacts kind of fresh, and keep them interested in your story, because you never know when they might be freelance, you know, they might write for a different article or a different publisher. And yeah, you want to be right there ready to sort of help them out.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about what constitutes a great story. So your story, Toby, everyone kind of knows this now, but can you just kind of give a high level overview of what you say your story is when you're talking to the press?
So it, I use a hook essentially because I think, you know, you've got to kind of treat this in a similar way to how you get sponsors. You need to find something like, say, high level, something that will really grab their attention, because these people get lots of requests quite regular, don't they? I mean, you know this, Jess. So what my kind of like way of doing this is that I really go in on the fact that the work I'm doing in motorsport is saving lives. And I'm quite confident that that's the case, because I've had lots of conversations with the awareness side of my kind of journey as an ambassador for the charity Fertility Network UK. And just the fact that I make this really bold statement, it grabs their attention. So I think that's kind of like, I don't know if that's answered your question, Jess, but I think that's kind of how I try and get kind of involved with these people, is that I go with some really big bold statements and I target the right people. So if there's a medical correspondent, you know, they're the kind of people I want to talk to, because it's a health related sort of niche that I'm part of. So when I kind of network to get kind of these contacts, that's kind of where I started looking with these big bold statements, and that then kind of generated conversations to actually get it out there. And because I really believe in my story being really valid, because it is such a heartfelt problem in the country and the globe, and I'm really doing something to solve it, then it makes it really easy to get kind of the connections to then get the stories out there. But have you got any tips around drivers that, I mean, my story is quite emotional, Jess. Obviously, I've come through a really emotional journey to get here and become a racing driver.
Mm.
You know, I don't like to play the whole violin story that's why I'm a racing driver, but it is my niche. That's kind of why I'm here. But for drivers that have got slightly different niches, maybe in the fitness world or maybe the fashion world, have you got any kind of ideas or advice for those kind of people?
Yeah, so your story has to be something that's slightly different to everyone else. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something super emotive or, you know, a challenge that you've overcome, although those do make great stories. But, you know, mental health stories are great, physical health stories are great. But if you're looking at something kind of outside of that, it's about finding stuff that other people aren't doing. So I would say look at what other athletes are doing, because you're kind of, I find racing drivers, although they are athletes, they're kind of classed as separate. So you can kind of look at, you know, the stories that the publications that you want to be in are telling about other athletes. So, you know, if there's a fashion angle, is it that you've created your own fashion brand, or, you know, you DIY a load of your clothes or something like that? Is that your story? That then, you know, there's maybe this really kind of fashionable element to your race car livery or your race suit. All kind of stuff like that can all come together to tell a story. So it's really about the human interest side of things. Realistically, the press doesn't care about what you're racing, how you're doing it. If you're fast, they want to know about you and what got you there, and you know, your motivations and your struggles and your wins and that kind of thing, in terms of like how you've developed as a person. And I think that's something really important to consider for this kind of thing. And I always use the example of, if you think of like those really, I don't even know what kind of magazines they are, but those ones that are like, my husband murdered something and then I did this thing, and then those like really really shocking crazy stories. Maybe that shouldn't be your story, that's awful.
Maybe not.
Why did my brain go there? Shouldn't have been watching horror movies last night. So I think it's really important to kind of look at those really kind of cheesy publications and maybe like tabloid newspapers and stuff, to see like the kind of the really really like lowbrow stories that people are telling, these real life stories, because you can kind of craft a less stressful version of that for yourself. But it just shows the interest in human storytelling. And I don't think drivers should be playing on all of the bad things that have happened to them in their lives, unless they feel comfortable with that, in which case go for it, because the you know, there's always a call for these real life stories. And there's so many publications that cover them and journalists that cover them. So kind of think in that respect, like if you go to a party and someone says, right, tell me the most interesting thing about you, what would that story be? So it's really a case of looking at all these avenues of like how you can tell something that hasn't been told before. So like, for example, on the fitness side of things, I feel like racing driver fitness has kind of been done as just here's the exercises I do. but what about something really specific of like the importance of neck strength in racing, and like how you went from, you know, doing races and it being really uncomfortable to improving your fitness in a way that improves neck strength? Like that's a really specific example, and that's the kind of thing that journalists are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely, Jess. And just on the note of being specific, you've got some amazing experiences, you know, in the high level world of PR because of your background. Let's just angle a little bit more into the specifics here. So that's generally talking about yourself as a driver and kind of like your specific things that you do. But what about the brands that sponsor you on track, trying to get them really unique press coverage? Have you got any tips around kind of A, why it's important, and B, how you get kind of really specific press coverage for a specific sponsor? Because I think that's where you can get some really nice return for those guys that help keep you out on track.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's important because, well, if you've agreed to give press coverage as part of your sponsorship deal, then you actually need to follow through on that. And press coverage is actually really high value because you can't buy it. It's not like, you know, an advert that has like a clear cost, but you can kind of relate it to that more advertorial side of things. So, like, if you know that a page in the Telegraph is £57,000 for one issue, well, if
It's
you can
crazy
do
price.
that, I know, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you can secure something like that for them, well, suddenly your sponsorship is worth at least 57,000 without anything else.
Yeah.
So it's a really good way to provide value, but also be able to put like a monetary number on it as well. So when it comes to renew, you're in a position to say, well, I got you, you know, X hundreds thousands of pounds of press coverage. Let's talk about what we can do for next year to like 10 times that maybe, which is absolutely doable with PR. But in terms of like how you get press coverage for specific sponsors, I always think it's really good as like a low level kind of starting point. And I know you certainly did this, Toby, is to go to like the trade press of whatever industry that sponsor is part of, and just kind of announce things and kind of tell your story as like bundled up in, you know, this business sponsors this racing driver for this reason. Because I think that that's a really, really easy win off the bat. And, you know, any trade publication is going to be crying out for a really cool story that involves a race car usually. Certainly in my experience, you know, I've done, actually even before I worked with you, Toby, we got a lot of rail magazine coverage and recruitment company or like recruitment trade press coverage for Turn 8 Racing.
Yeah.
Just because they were two of the niches that we had sponsors in. So I think that that's a really easy win to begin with. But in terms of like getting that wider press coverage, again, you need to think about the story. So, I mean, it really, really depends on who the sponsor is. But like Toby said earlier, you need that hook. So just like in a pitch, you need that one thing that shows and tells a journalist that this is a story they haven't written before. And that's kind of down to you to work out with your sponsor. And it's really, really hard to give examples. But if you do have a sponsor in mind and you want to know how to get press coverage for them, feel free to come into the sponsorship community group on Facebook and just ask us. Say, hey, I have a sponsor in this industry. How do I get PR for them? And we can talk it out. That's what the group's for. But let me try and give an example. So let's say you have a fitness sponsor. You know, are they doing something great in terms of how they're sustainably creating clothing? Or, you know, are they creating, you know, nutrition products that are for human performance? Because there's a good link there with racing. So like think about, it's actually also good if you look at the current press coverage they're getting, even if they're not doing that much, like what is the story that they're trying to tell? What's their mission? What's their values? Work out how that relates to you as a person. And then that's the story that you should pitch to kind of like connect all those things together.
Yeah. And also it just, you know, this all goes full circle, Jess, because it's, you know, then it's around your niche. You're thinking of outside the box, which is again previous episodes, and you're finding unique ways to create interest in the media and also make a journalist's life easier to write that press release for you. and before you know it, you'll get results so quickly. It honestly, it blew my mind what I achieved last year, and it was just purely a bit of kind of clever thinking, a bit of networking with the right people, and have a really interesting story that they wanted to talk about. And hey presto, here you go, I've got all this amazing coverage. And we were well into the millions of people covered last year. Like, the reach figures are insane. So yeah, just take that as kind of like a kind of a good news story for you guys and a bit of inspiration. But it can be done. And for those people out there struggling, I think we've covered some really nice tips today to actually get that story out there and help you guys get the coverage you deserve.
Absolutely. And I just really want to quickly cover how to write a press release, because although I don't think press releases are always necessary, like sometimes you can get away with just, creating like almost a relationship building message with a journalist. And you can basically say, oh, hey, this is my story. Do you think it's interesting? And kind of go from there. But if you want to write a press release and do something a bit more formal, because obviously it looks good on you and your sponsors as well if you're doing this, there's two really, really key points, maybe three, in a press release. So the first is the headline. So think about what kind of headline someone would use actually in the publication, and try and kind of replicate that. You usually want a press release, especially for local press, to be as close to the finished story as you can get. Then the next, probably even more important than the headline, is the first paragraph. So you need to cover who, when, what, why, and how. All in the first paragraph, and keep it short. Now, this is a skill. You might need to do a bit of practice before you get this right, but basically when a journalist is reading a press release, they want to know whether the story and the angle is right for them before they read through the whole thing. So keep it all in that first paragraph, and then trickle information down into the rest. So, if you're talking about who you are, how you're using racing to do a thing, etc., you just say it in really brief wording at the top, and then you can just go into more detail as the story progresses. And you should also include quotes from you and whatever sponsor you're talking about in there, because then, if a journalist is in a rush, which often they are, they can just lift those quotes. They don't have to phone you and go back and forth trying to get an interview or anything like that. It's also really important that you have contact details on there as well, for obvious reasons. But another thing that I find often slows down this process is not having pictures. And I know this as a journalist, the amount of times I've got stories and thought, oh, I've got to chase this person for the right imagery, I won't bother. Whereas if someone sends me the right images from the get-go, I'll just upload it and it's done. So in terms of imagery, if you're going to print, you need high-res images, but some web publications will also require high-res images, so bear that in mind. You can look up what that is, but that usually means they're large and over 300 dpi. And the best way to send these is via a link to like Dropbox or wherever you store your images, rather than huge attachments to an email that might get caught up in spam filters or just really annoy a journalist when you clog up their inbox. So they're my like really quick tips in terms of like how to write a press release. But again, if you have any questions on this, you can ask in the Facebook group, or you can seek me out on social media. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, it's really exciting, I think, the press stuff, Jess. And I think what you've just highlighted there is the sort of the key point I take there is just make it as convenient as possible for the journalists that you're talking to get your article out there, because these people are very busy. They've got usually very tight deadlines. And if you can help them do their job and make it convenient for them, then you're going to get more coverage with good results. And there was something you said at the very beginning point there, Jess, with the opening paragraph. That's actually something I've not considered before. So thank you for that top tip.
You're welcome.
I'm going to introduce that to some of my emails that I'll be writing in the short term. And I think that would be really good, because like you say, it's just really highlighting exactly what it's all about. It gives them a quick kind of like, okay, that's they can accept it and read through, or they can go, it's not for us. But at least then you're making it easy for them to make that decision. And convenience is key, I think, in this world, because news travels fast, and they need to work fast, don't they? That's kind of their industry. It's very fast paced. So yeah, quite like motorsport. So
yeah, perfect.
Who doesn't want to write about motorsport though, to be fair? I mean, it's good fun, right? It's a good industry.
Exactly. It makes every other industry more interesting as well. So if you do have sponsors that are in quite a dull industry, motorsport suddenly makes them exciting. I also just want to touch on kind of wider content marketing, just because it's not quite PR, but it kind of comes into it in that if you're creating your own content to publish as guest posts on blogs or on platforms like Drive Tribe maybe, or even on your own blog, you get a chance to kind of control the narrative. But it's also something that you can then showcase to the press, saying, like, that this is part of my story, but I want to use, your publication. I want to reach your readers to tell a different part. So I don't want drivers to think that, the only kind of coverage they can get for themselves is via journalists. Sometimes you can go on, different platforms or to like blogs and stuff like that, and you can write the story. So do just bear that in mind, because a lot of places will really, really enjoy having something actually in your voice. And I think Drive Tribe is really good for this, because Drive Tribe has such a huge audience and you can literally just go on and post what you want. It's actually a really good opportunity for you to tell like these really detailed snippets of your story and of who you are. And especially if you're in a position where you're looking for fans and to build your audience, it's a really great kind of platform for that. But it gets huge reach, so it's a good selling tool to then go to a sponsor and say, well, this article about my story on Drive Tribe got 100,000 views. I want to do something similar with you, not just there, but in press all around the world, kind of thing. So it could be a really good selling point if you're controlling that narrative.
Yeah, and just on that note then, Jess, you mentioned about blogs as well. I've recently started my blog, albeit a little bit patchy at the moment. But we had a driver of the week a few weeks ago she has an amazing sort of personal space of blog, and her website has a huge reach, of which she highlights all different sponsor stories and tips and advice and all that kind of stuff. And her audience in her country is just like blown up because of it, hasn't it? And since then, she's then attracted more sponsors because she's got kind of like a live case scenario of like, this is what I'm doing, and any sponsor that's looking at that are like, crack at this, this is huge, we want to be part of that. And then she's then attracting more sponsors. So kind of like building that audience up on various different platforms, i.e. your website and, like you say, Drive Tribe, place like that, can be really great at building your audience, not just on a social media level, but on a really high engaged level, because these platforms are used in a huge way now.
Yeah, and there's, I think drivers who, if they like blogging, should think about themselves as influencers in that traditional respect, because if you're building an audience on a blog, that's something you can then kind of sell to sponsors almost. So if you have a really engaged audience through your blog, whether it's about you and your racing or about something else, you can say to sponsors, look, do you want to reach this audience? And then you can use that blog to promote your sponsors to those people. So I think a blog is really valuable. I'm a bit biased because I've got like 12, but no, not anymore. I used to have tons, but I had to kind of cut them down. But yeah, so anything like a blog or even like a newsletter, whether that's done traditionally or through like a platform like Substack, like what my Jess of All Trades one is. Again, if you're building an audience, it can be beneficial to potential sponsors in the future as well.
Too true.
So shall we go on to our driver of the week? You have the nomination for us today, Toby. So if you want to go ahead and kind of tell people who this driver is and why we've chosen them.
Yeah, so my driver of the week this week is a driver that has taken on Jess's sort of advice from her webinar, which was 2 weeks ago now, I believe.
Yeah.
And the webinar was about relationship building and gaining kind of your audience and doing all that kind of stuff. And it's fantastic. It's a really, really engaging webinar. But our driver of the week this week is Neil Venter. He took all of that advice on and he went to town and did exactly what kind of he learned on that webinar. And he's since had a really good result off the back of it, where he was networking on LinkedIn, which was the platform he was using to sort of engage with people. He had a few adjustments to his profile to kind of like make it really obvious about what he does. But because he had this really, really engaging conversation, he now is in a potential place to talk sponsorship with that person purely off the back of just concentrating on networking. And I think it's brilliant because it's testimonial to you, Jess, about what you teach about networking is really key, and relationship building is really important. But the fact that we've now got a driver that's just applied that straight away, and within the space of 2 weeks, he's now in a position where he looks like he could be looking at a sponsorship agreement with them in the long term, which I think is amazing. That's blown my mind, because it just shows that you can do exactly what you teach, Jess, and get results. And it's a massive win for Neil Venter. So this driver of the week this week is Neil Venter. Massive congratulations to you, mate. And yeah, let's hope you've got some future success stories to share with us.
Yeah, I was really excited by this kind of win, because I know that suddenly going out and trying to build relationships with big business owners is kind of scary, and a lot of drivers kind of really have to build up mentally to do that. But Neil just swooped straight in, did the thing, got the result, and I love that. I think that kind of mentality should be an inspiration to everyone who is kind of thinking, oh, but I'm a bit nervous, I don't know if what I'm doing is right. Just go for it. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But actually, most of the time, if you follow kind of, what I've taught about relationship building, be it on social media or if you came along to the first webinar, if you do what I've taught, you will get a result. So hopefully those webinars have kind of built a bit of confidence. And yeah, I'm really, really pleased with Neil's win, and I can't wait to see how this one kind of progresses.
Yeah, it's exciting, isn't it? It's super exciting, sorry. But I think just on that note, Jess, I think, the webinar was fantastic, and there was some really great advice in there. And a block that I had for such a long time is that I was just always worried about it not working. Like, that's what I was worried about, and it prevented me from actually doing.
Mm.
But what you've got to remember is these people are normal people like you and I. And if you've taken that advice on and you do it kind of correctly, and how Jess kind of explains, you do get results. It's amazing. The conversation you'll have with people will really transform, and you'll have some really engaging connections. And who knows where that will take you guys together on an awesome journey ahead. And Neil definitely is embracing and embarking on that journey for sure.
Yeah, awesome stuff. So well done, Neil. That's all we have for you guys today. So thanks for listening as always, and we will see you next week.
Yeah, see you next week, guys. Thanks for tuning in.